Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that enters not by the door into the sheepfold, but climbeth up some other way, the same is a thief and a robber. But he that enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the porter openeth, and the sheep hear his voice. And he calleth his own sheep by name, and leadeth them out. And when he putteth forth his own sheep, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. And a stranger will they not follow.
Good morning. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. We're continuing today in the Gospel of John in the 9th chapter. Chapter 9, verse 1. And as Jesus passed by, he saw a man which was blind from his birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, Neither hath this man sinned, nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him. I must work the works of him that sent me, while it is day. The night cometh, when no man can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. When he had thus spoken, he spat on the ground, and made clay of the spittle, and anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay, and said unto him, Go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is by interpretation sent. He went his way therefore, and washed, and came seeing. The neighbors therefore, and they which before had seen him that he was blind, said, Is not this he that sat and begged? Hold on. Some said, This is he. Others said, He is like him. But he said, I am he. Therefore they said unto him, How were thine eyes opened? He answered and said, A man that is called Jesus made clay, and anointed mine eyes, and said unto me, Go to the pool of Siloam, and wash. And I went and washed, and I received sight. Then said they unto him, Where is he? He said, I know not. They brought to the Pharisees him that aforetime was blind. And it was the Sabbath day when Jesus made the clay, and opened his eyes. Then again the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. He said unto him, He put clay upon mine eyes, and I washed, and do see. Therefore said some of the Pharisees, This man is not of God, because he keepeth not the Sabbath day. Others said, How can a man that is a sinner do such miracles? And there was a division among them. They say unto the blind man again, What sayest thou of him, that he hath opened thine eyes? He said, He is a prophet. But the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been blind, and received his sight, until they called the parents of him that had received his sight. And they asked them, saying, Is this your son, who ye say was born blind? How then doth he now see? His parents answered them and said, We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. But by what means now he seeth, we know not. Or who hath opened his eyes, we know not. He is of age, ask him. He shall speak for himself. These words spake his parents, because they feared the Jews. For the Jews had agreed already, that if any man did confess that he was Christ, he should be put out of the synagogue. Therefore said his parents, He is of age, ask him. So they had their own opinion, but they didn't want to give it. Then again called they the man that was blind, and said unto him, Give God the praise. We know that this man is a sinner. He answered and said, Whether he be a sinner or no, I know not. One thing I know, that whereas I was blind, now I see. Then said they to him again, What did he to thee? How opened he thine eyes? He answered them, I have told you already, and ye did not hear. Wherefore would you hear it again? Will you also be his disciples? Then they reviled him and said, Thou art his disciple, but we are Moses' disciples. We know that God spake unto Moses. As for this fellow, we know not from whence he is. The man answered and said unto them, Why, herein is a marvelous thing, that ye know not from whence he is, and yet he hath opened my eyes. And now we know that God heareth not sinners, but if any man be a worshipper of God, and doeth his will, him he heareth. Since the world began, it was not heard that a man opened the eyes of one that was born blind. If this man were not of God, he could do nothing. They answered and said unto him, Thou wast altogether born in sins, and dost thou teach us? And they cast him out. Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and when he had found him, he said unto him, Dost thou believe on the Son of God? He answered and said, Who is he, Lord, that I might believe on him? Jesus said unto him, Thou hast both seen him, and it is he that and it is he that talketh with thee. And he said, Lord, I believe, and worshipped him. And Jesus said, For judgment I am come into this world, that they which see might... We're going to start that verse again. Hold on a second here. Here we go. Verse 39. And Jesus said, For judgment I am come into this world, that they which see not might see, and that they which see might be I'm going to try it again. For judgment I am come into this world, that they which see not might see, and that they which see might be made blind. And some of the Pharisees which were with him heard these words, and said unto him, Are we blind also? Jesus said unto them, If you were blind, you should have no sin. But now you say, We see. Therefore your sin remaineth. Some interesting thoughts on that. I look at that last part a little differently than I used to, I think. Because I used to look at it like are we blind also? But these are the Pharisees which were with him. Obviously not the ones who threw the guy out, I think. Some of these ones are questioning whether or not they're blind. Are we blind also? They ask him. Because they're questioning. I confess to God, I'm blind. Lord, I'm blind. I can't see. When I know I'm blind, I can't see God. Where is he? You know what I mean? I've only seen him as much as he has revealed himself to me through his Son and through his Spirit. But in all that, I am groping about in the darkness blind. We are all blind men. That's what it says in the prophets. We grope for the wall like the blind. And we grope as if we had no eyes. We stumble at noonday as in the night. Paul said we see through a glass darkly. And that's of believers. We with our eyes supposedly opened. I know that I always have I trust in Christ for my healing and salvation, but I also do not mock God by denying my own sin. Because that's essentially what we end up doing when we start turning a blind eye to our own sins. The Pharisees are so blinded by their own righteousness that the weightier matters, the things that they have allowed to slip, as far as the things they've not taken care of. In other places where Jesus, I always think of Matthew 23, it gives you the whole list of the offenses. They neglected the weightier matters of judgment, mercy, and faith. So one of the quintessential questions of all times is, when people have a sin, there's an impulse, or people have an affliction, there's an impulse to say, aha, God's punishing you because you have cancer, because you have heart disease, because you had an accident and something bad happened. It's a you were born blind. In fact, he was born blind, so his disciples ask him, who's the sinner here? Because this is the common belief people have in biblical times. And even to this day, I've seen it manifested among Christians. There's an impulse because, and the truth is, a lot of times if people have sin and it's known, you see something bad happen to them and you assume there's some sort of connection. Sometimes there is, obviously. And that's the thing. That's why, because people observe that sin has consequences, right? Sin has consequences. Meaning if I go out and drink to excess, I will reap in my body a certain recompense of reward that is, that is a part of the nature of that sin of going over the line. And there are a lot of things like that too. I mean, like sexually transmitted diseases are often a consequence of promiscuous sexual behavior. And that's running rampant right now with the monkeypox, right? Very close. So you can get it without that, but you have to get really close to people to get it. And so there's consequences sometimes. But that consequence isn't necessarily, someone goes out and drinks and then they go out and drive around and get in an accident and there's another consequence, but it's not related to that person. Like if they run someone over, let's say. Now they got a hit and run. Now all the consequences that happen to the person that does all those things, those are natural consequences to them. Now the person that got hit by the drunk driver, though, what about them? Why did that happen to them? That's the question. Did they sin? Did their parents sin? Why is this happening to me? Why does this horrible thing that does not appear to be a direct consequence of any natural action? You know what I mean? You stare at the sun, you could go blind. But why was this guy born blind? And another thing, it's like in Ezekiel, and this is already in the Old Testament, it's already not true, but it's a common belief among people. They want to assign blame for things that you can't obviously blame on anyone or anything, except perhaps God. And often people do. They blame God for things that happen to them mysteriously or that they can't explain, like a child being born blind or a miscarriage or a congenital defect that leads to the death of a child. There's all kinds of things that happen that cause bad things to happen to people that don't seem to be tied to anything. And indeed, there is, what do I call it? What do I want to say about it? Well, first of all, Jesus' answer to why was this man born blind is that the works of God should be manifest in him. For him, it was a special challenge. And I tell you, I talked about this a lot in the past Bible studies. That Australian guy with the no arms and no legs and just the flipper foot. He manifests the works of God in him. You can see it radiating off his face, and his love of God and his trust and his faith in him, even though he is not made whole, And if he isn't made whole, why should I expect my petty request to be answered? Just because I want my life ordered a certain way. Just because I want my life a little easier. Just because I want my life. How would that manifest God's works? How is that going to bring glory to God? Or bring that his works should be manifest? That's a lot of the thing. I consider nature to be an unmediated testimony of God's work. I mean, we see what God has done. And the truth about that is important to me because God dwells in the truth, in the light of the truth. Because the light and the truth are closely connected, because the light reveals what is truly there. The darkness is what, the men love the darkness because their works are evil and they want to hide. God brings light. And there's this seeing. And so also this guy, because he's born blind, there is an overarching meaning to this story. Because here is one that is blind from his birth. And Christ has mercy on him to make him see, so that God's work may be made manifest. What work? It's the work that God does to bring us to him in salvation. We have to have our eyes opened. As I'm saying, we are all born blind from our birth. That is us. We don't know. And it's not that I've sinned, or nor that my parents, that I'm blind. But it's because of God's work. You know? What is God's work? Well, his workmanship involves vessels of wrath appointed to wrath, vessels of mercy appointed to mercy. That's God's work. And see, you can't, and the funny thing about it is, you might think like, well, he was born blind, so he's a vessel of wrath, right? Isn't the wrath of God upon him because he was born blind? Nope. That doesn't show you that. Because physical sight is not necessary. We enjoy it and we pity them because they have not what we have. But they get along, you know, especially in today's society, especially someone who's born blind, because and also the fact that being born blind, the fact that he could see, it wasn't just a surgical correction, because the brain would not have wired itself properly as a child to see. So the fact that he could even understand what he saw is even more of a miracle. Well, it's not just giving him sight, but perception. And that's implicit. It doesn't specifically say that, but it's implicit because he sees, and there's no... I've heard of people who have had their sight restored, who lost it either they were born with a particular defect or lost it very young, and it was able to be restored. And it was like they were driving down the highway, and they saw the signs coming at them, and then they thought they were going to hit the signs because they didn't understand how to interpret what their eyes were seeing, because their brains weren't wired up for it. Medicine couldn't do that. There was in the book of Ezekiel, it mentions this proverb, you know, the parents have eaten the sour grape and the children's teeth are set on edge. You know, and that refers to this kind of thing. And God, even then in the Old Testament, says, you will not use this saying anymore. Because every man has to answer for his own iniquity. Because that's what that was about. Now, sometimes it's true, children suffer because of the sins of the parents. But meaning like abusive, the children of adult alcoholics, it's a syndrome. I mean, they suffer because of it. Being raised a certain way. Being raised by incompetent parents. Being raised by the schools, quite frankly, damages all the children. I mean, and some of them are so fragile that it damages them permanently. You know what I mean? Many kids get through it just fine, but many do not. Right? Then they talk about the school to prison pipelines, because the school is essentially a prison for children. You know, we can't let them just wander around, right? Or can you? Yeah. So they suffer consequences of our actions, but something so untied, like being born blind, or being born with or someone born with Down syndrome. Nothing bad has happened to them. So why was this person born with Down syndrome? Well, I don't know what their purpose is yet. Maybe it is that the works of God could be manifest in them, because that is ultimately for all of us. The world unfolding is the work of God being manifested. And I like the light of the truth of what that is. It is a hard thing for man to accept, the work of God. Because sometimes the work of God is to make you see. But as Jesus said, remember what he said later? Is to blind others. He goes around, because that's the light that, they say blinded by the light. The light does also blind. That's why no man has seen God, because you can't see him and live. No man's really seen God. You might have seen a little, they've seen the tail end of him, or he let him see his garment flutter or whatever. No one's ever really looked upon God, gazed upon him, contemplated him in his fullness. Unless your eye sockets burn through the back of your skull. As a human being, we're not equipped to be exposed to that kind of radiant power. You want to, we know you can't go in outer space. You'd be irradiated in seconds from the sun, without some protection. Yeah, you boil in space because there's no place for the heat to go. But yeah. The true purpose of every man, because God is bringing forth his sons. We talked about that. He's manifested. The point of the world is for the sons of God to be made manifest. That's the work. And it manifests itself, and yes, God will cause some that are blind to see. But others that see to be blinded. Right? Not too far down. Verse 39. For judgment I am come into this world, that they which see not might see, and that they which see might be made blind. That's the other half of it. Why was this man made blind? That the works of God may be manifest. Why was he caused to see? Because the works of God might be manifest. Because in both things, whether you were one that saw and that was blinded in the spirit, the Pharisees were the highest sort of religious order. They were, it'd be like all the people today that are the most respected religious leaders. Not even the kooks, like the respected ones. Not like the fringy guys. The Pharisees were the mainstream, respected. Right next, at the temple, it was like the Pharisees were the dominant sect. Because there were other sects of the Jews, but the Pharisees were dominant. And considered the most they certainly consider themselves the most strict in their adherence to Moses' code. And of course, that's why this whole affair offends them. So there's anything I want to say about the man and the sins. It's an important thing. Okay, I'm trying to break into the stream. I had a power outage, and I'm trying to just stream right into it. But it doesn't know. I don't know if it's working or not. Oh, yes, it is. Okay. Okay, I'm trying to break into the stream. I had a power outage. All right. I heard myself talking. Oh, wait, there we go. Okay. Sorry about that. We had power outage here. And it broke, and my computer shut off, and I restarted it, and I couldn't even get into YouTube or Bible Hub, apparently, to get back where I was. Okay, so I guess this is whatever. Here we go. Let's just continue the study. The guy, yeah. Oh, great, and that's gone too. Sorry, I'm breaking the study. It's like I got to start over, except we're not going to do the music. All right. So the guy who was born blind, do I want to say anything more about that? No, I think it is important, yes. The concept of that you don't blame every sin on the sinner. As far as, not every sin, every bad thing that happens on a person's sin. But even though there is chastisement, that was a word I hadn't said yet, but I wanted to say in context with this, because chastisement is a legitimate thing that happens to you when you are following Christ, where you will sin and things will happen to you because you sinned. Maybe even unrelated things. Because you sinned. Negative consequences do happen because of sin sometimes. And meaning negative consequences from the Lord. And so those negative consequences are not part of this. Why did this happen? So the works of God may be manifest. I mean, it's part of it, of course, because we're all his workmanship. I'm sorry, the fan on, but it was hot. We're all his workmanship, but the most important thing I would take away from that is when bad things to happen to someone, a brother or something, don't jump on them assuming, they must have sinned. Or it's chastisement. You don't even assume that. Because people often suffer things, for instructive reasons, maybe not for chastisement, but for exercising in godliness. When I have to endure things patiently, the first thing I try to do before I get angry, before I get frustrated, is to think that perhaps this is from the Lord to strengthen me. This is from God to strengthen me, to make me more like Him. So there we go. That's the different aspects of it. Why is this bad thing happening? Well, there are several things that could be going on. But never assume that it's like, oh, he was born blind because of whatever, because his mom and dad were bad people, or usually that's very uncommon in our society, right? Nobody ever says like, oh, it's because the parents were bad, the children are suffering, some unrelated thing. I mean, obviously when they're suffering because like, oh, they're out all night partying and the kids are unsupervised and they're not being fed properly. Yeah, well, there's negative consequences to that too. But that's just nature. I mean, it is God's works too. Also, His nature is His work. It's like there are natural consequences of things. But this being born blind was not the natural consequence of any sin. It was merely that God's works should be manifest in someone by making them see. I must work the works of Him that sent me while it is day. The night cometh when no man can work. And what he means by that, I'm not positive. I mean, I know what it means on the face of it, but how to apply that to the situation he was in. Does he, now is your hour, the hour of darkness when he was crucified. And I guess in a sense that it's sort of true. Like while he was being crucified, he wasn't allowed to use his power to save himself or to do anything in particular. Though he did, was it the last thing he did to heal the high priest's ear? Or was there something on the way on the cross? I forget. But again, his work on the cross was his work. So, like even in darkness, God works all the time. Like he says about the Sabbath. The Sabbath day is when you're not supposed to be able to work. No man can work on the Sabbath. No man can work at night. So that's why I'm trying to, and because he says, as long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. So wait a second, as long as he's in the world, it's daytime, there's light, right? So, and for me, there is no darkness because I have Christ in me through the Holy Spirit. He is in me, and so I have light in me. We want our whole body to be full of light, as Jesus said. And the light that is in us is the light of Christ, which is the light of every man. It is the light of life. To fully embrace what it means to be alive, what it means to be with God, to unite with God in living, in the light, to walk in the light. And where there is no darkness, to hide the works of evil. And so, certainly without the light, no man can work without light, right? You can't work without, I think that's what he's saying, basically, this. You can't work without light. Try it sometime. At least for generally speaking, obviously there are exceptions. But things that require seeing, especially us who need our eyes because we're used to using them, nothing against blind people because I know they work without eyes. I don't. I'm used to seeing stuff. You blind me on certain things and I'm helpless. I'm so used to those eyes. Right? And so I think about when I'm working on a car, it's all dark. I need to get under there with a light so I can see. Because you can't work where it's dark. I think that's basically all he's saying. You need light. And as long as I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. But what about when he's not in the world? Well, then the light has departed from the world, but the light has returned to us through his Spirit. I go away and I come again. Again, I go away and come again. I will send a comforter to you. So that when he's gone, he can still be with us. And the light may remain. And then we become the light. We become the candlesticks that bear the light of Christ. Let your light so shine before men. But it has to be the true light. Not the showy BS light of self, promotion and greed that we see so often in the church. It's so disgusting with all the greed we see, the covetousness, the fornication that it's spawned. These churches with all this money, they're filled with greed, wickedness, and fornication. That, I could lay that sin at the feet of every little church in America. What they put up with. Fornication. Used to be considered hell-worthy. Fornicators. Sorcerers. Idolaters. And all liars shall have their part in the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone. That's what the Lord says. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. When he had thus spoken, he spat on the ground and made clay of the spill. Of course, it brings to mind God forming Adam of the dust of the ground, right? Of the dust of the ground, he made man and blew into his nostrils the breath of life. Now he spits and makes clay from the dust of the earth and anoints the man's eyes and tells him, go wash it off in the pool of Siloam, which is by interpretation sent. Is he sent to the pool? Does it mean Christ sent? I tend to think of him as the one who God has sent to do the works of God. He works the works of him that sent him. What? To give sight to the blind. But by literally giving sight to the blind, he's drawing attention to the spiritual blindness of the Pharisees. And this man's, he has almost no personality until he's given his sight. And then suddenly he blossoms into being something. Even in the narrative, he's almost negligible. Even when he goes before the Pharisees, what they call his parents. This guy, let's talk to his parents. That's how negligible this person's testimony is considered. Right? But it's like he's created out of nothing and then brought before them. Anyways, but I'm just saying, like, in the way it's presented in the text, in the way it's constructed, like that's what I'm talking about. Like he comes out, he's very, whatever. He's just the man who was born blind. I mean, everyone's has pity on him. That's about it. So he went his way and washed. So he was obedient to that. He did what he was told. And he came back seeing. So the neighbors, so they would know this guy. He's a full-grown adult who's been blind since he was born. The little blind kid next door. And they're like, isn't this him? They've seen him. And obviously others said he is like him. Because now that he sees his eyes, he's acting differently. Obviously, so it's going to not seem quite the same. He's like, he seems like that guy. But it doesn't seem like the guy. Right? Because and he was so negligible, some people didn't even really know him. That's how bad it is. Some knew who he was. A lot of other people, they knew of that blind guy, but they never even looked at him long enough to remember really what he looks like, to tell you the truth. They just remember him as a begging guy. This guy isn't begging. He says, no, I'm him. That's me. They knew there was a blind guy. And as long, I'm sure they're going to take his word for it. They're almost unbelieving because just of the fact that he's seeing. That's all it is. He's like him. But of course, that guy was blind. This guy sees. That's a big difference. He looks like him. And they want to know how his eyes were open. He says, this guy called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said, go to the pool of Siloam and wash. And I went and washed and I received sight. Simple story. Then they said, where is he? I want to go see him. Sure. He's like, I don't know. They brought him to the Pharisees because there was protocol to be followed religiously when someone was relieved of an affliction. They would offer peace offerings and stuff like that. And Thanksgiving offerings and stuff. But they bring him for examination because it's a notable miracle also. Maybe they just want to tell him this guy was born blind. Jesus healed him. Or the Pharisees heard about it or whatever. They don't say exactly why they're being brought, but I assume that basically they heard about it and they wanted to see him. Or you could, I guess, like I said, I was going with the automatic, like they just kind of went over to them on an automatic pilot. So they're like, well, we go to the Pharisees now, of course, because someone was healed. I don't know. But it might be that they had heard and then they sent for him. And of course, it already mentions it was the Sabbath day. Just so you know in verse 14, just so you know. So you know there's going to be problems. And again, immediately, they asked him the same story. He repeated the exact same thing, basically. I put mud on my eyes. I washed. Now I see. And I'm sure he thought he was telling the story over and over again. It was probably amusing because it was like it's the most amazing thing that could ever happen to you. And at the same time, everyone's totally flummoxed by it. It's got to be. He sounds to me like he's having a bit of fun sometimes with this because he would be overwhelmed with positive feelings and emotions, right, from this miracle done for his sake. At least not really for his sake, but here's the thing. Though it's done for God's glory and for God's works, when you're the object, you feel very, it has a way of lifting you up. And, as long as we let it just be in a positive way and don't let ourselves get carried away with thinking we are really something because God has done something for us. I mean, because when God does something for me, it does increase my faith. Like when I received the Holy Spirit, it increased my faith and it made me feel, but yeah, he did that for me, but much more overwhelming was I know this is real for sure. I believe in him now more than ever. More so than it was like, oh, God really chose me because he did this for me. He does do things for us. But I mean, people can have good things happen and then, not. Remember there was a time when Jesus healed a bunch of people and only one returned to give thanks. Because some people, they'll receive good things of God, as in life, and not be thankful, but rather just go their way and think, well, of course, good things happen to me because I'm the best. Of course, God did something nice for me. He wants me on his team. He looked at me and said, "There's a winner." That's, I think, the attitude some people have. All right. And they said, this man is not of God because he keepeth not the Sabbath day. They just hung up on that. I know he's not of God because he doesn't keep the Sabbath properly. Now that goes without saying that he probably kept all the other customs. In fact, I always made a deal out of the fact that on the Shroud of Turin it shows, there's a book I have that identifies the existence of faint objects, which amount to things like phylacteries. And it offended some people because Jesus had criticized the Pharisees for wearing them. He didn't criticize the Pharisees for wearing phylacteries. He criticized them for making them big and flashy. He didn't say don't do alms. He said when you do your alms, do them in secret. Do them this way. He didn't say don't wear phylacteries. He said they make their phylacteries big and fat, and they enjoy they make broad their phylacteries and enjoy the uppermost rooms at feasts and like to sit in the chief seats. They were show-offs in their religion. But the idea that Jesus wouldn't follow the code of Moses is wrong. He followed it. He wasn't trying to defy Moses in his mode of dress or in anything, or even in the Sabbath keeping as far as he's concerned. He made clay and put it on their eyes because that is the work that God told him to do on that day. That's why he did it. He says, I must work the works of him that sent me. And notice the name of the pool was sent. I think that's interesting because there you go. I must work the works of him that sent me. The closest thing I see sent was Christ. He is the one sent. Sent to what? The pool of Siloam, the water of life, but also the water of healing, the water of cleansing away the mud and revealing the sight that we might see the world afresh and new with eyes that see and ears that hear. Things that go beyond sight, things that go into the spiritual realm, and so that we can see and hear from God and learn to recognize his voice and then also to obey it. And so, where I lost my place here. He is not of God because he keeps not the Sabbath day. Others said, I think it's funny because the second group also agrees. But how can a man that is a sinner do such miracles? Okay, maybe they're questioning questioning if he's a sinner. But or are they questioning the fact that he's doing miracles? How can a sinner do such miracles? It's like, how is he doing it? We know he's a sinner. Nah, I think maybe they're taking more of the part of like this. Maybe he's not a sinner, because look at the miracles. It's hard to tell for me. That's how I used to take it, but I look at the other side now, because I try to, every time I go to the scriptures, I try to look at it in a different way. Or maybe, because I know how I understand it. I want to try to understand it in a new way, even if it isn't right, because at least it'll help me by comparison strengthen the thing which I know to be true. I can at least process and say, well, wait, is it like this? No, not like that. No, definitely not. But then other things, I've definitely thought that there are things that people traditionally interpret that are just wrong, like the things like, my God, why have you forsaken me? I think people get that completely wrong. Because God never forsakes you. I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. So, but sinners, no, that's the point of the cross. The cross meant that God is not forsaking us sinners. He is going to meet us right where we are. He went down to the very depths of where sin takes you. And he was God. There's no God forsaking God. That's ridiculous. Anyways, and it also means you just didn't understand the message of Psalm 22, which means, you would totally miss out on, if you can't understand the mercy of God through Psalm 22, how could you understand the mercy of God through Christ properly? It doesn't make any sense to me, because you have God turns his back on sin and all that. Yeah, but he also sent Christ, so he doesn't, does he? He cleanses it away with his own blood. That's getting pretty darn near sin. Not doing it, but he's not afraid to get his hands dirty cleaning us up, is what it means, essentially. There was a division among them. Okay, so clearly that it divided them. But I still think it's funny that it's phrased in such a way that it's still like they're afraid of the other side. Because they put it that way. How can a man that is a sinner do such miracles? They don't say only a man that is of God can do such miracles. Taking the exact, because they're like, this man is not of God. And then they say, how can a man that is a sinner? They don't go, how can a man that is of God? No. How can a man that is not of God do such miracles? Would be the exact response to this man is not of God. They just question, oh, can he be a sinner? They say that the blind again, what do you say of him? And he said, he's a prophet. That would be his first go-to thing. He wouldn't necessarily jump right to Messiah based on just that. He's a prophet for sure. But that's what he thought. He's a prophet. A man that speaks for God. Prophet is one who speaks for God. A spokesman. We think of prophet as a foreteller of the future, because sometimes that's what prophets do. And indeed, in Greek, the word prophetes means to foretell. But the Old Testament idea of a prophet does not really have any embedded meaning of foretelling the future. It really means to be a spokesperson for God, the one who speaks on his behalf. And also to speak before. I should say prophet. Prophetes means to speak before. But you could see it doesn't have to mean to say ahead of time. It can mean like I come out in front of God, like John the Baptist. I prepare the way before him. That's what a prophet does. A prophet comes and speaks in front of God, so to speak. Meaning, that's why the two witnesses, these are the two olive trees and the two candlesticks which stand before the God of all the earth. The prophet is the one who's like God's leading attorney, so to speak. He comes to prosecute read Isaiah. He basically acts like a prosecuting attorney, laying out the case against the children of Israel from God's perspective. And also, it's not just that, but that is and then to tell what's going to happen, too, because of it, to lay out the consequences. But that's what a prophet. The prophets were the men. Moses was considered a prophet. And he was considered, because it said in Deuteronomy, right, when we covered that, Deuteronomy 18, he will raise up a prophet like unto you, Moses, like unto me, he said to his people. And Christ was that prophet. That's what they call it, that prophet. But that prophet is also the Messiah. And so when he talks about this guy being a prophet, this is a pretty heavy-duty prophet because a lot of prophets didn't do miracles. Most of them did not, actually. But the writing prophets, certainly. Isaiah gave signs and stuff. There were signs and miracles, I guess. But not like Jesus, for sure. But the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been born blind, so they got his parents out, right? They thought, this is BS. This is some sort of, because that would resolve the conundrum. How did a sinner heal? He didn't. This is a come on. This is a put on. We're being deceived here. Because sinners don't do that. And this man keeps not the Sabbath, so we know he's not of God. And so we know that this isn't a miracle. That's the logic. And I'll tell you what. We can be the same way, man. When we're blind, when we got certain thoughts in our mind, I'll tell you what. You look at Jesus, like I said in the last chapter, he comes at you, you don't see him coming, but he comes as a man speaking the truth. So look out when men are speaking the truth to you, careful how you receive that. Because when there's people speaking the truth, they're speaking for God. Because God is the protector and the source of all truth, really. And so when someone's telling you the truth, you better be mindful, because you might be hearing things from the Spirit of God himself. And so that's how it comes sometimes. The temptation comes because, we get tested against ourselves. Because it's me. I got to turn this fan on. Getting overheated here. We have to examine ourselves to see whether we're in the faith, and also to see, are we being honest with God? Are we honest with ourselves? Are we really walking uprightly? Sometimes we know we're not walking uprightly, and we do not want to receive rebuke foolishly. I've always there have been times when I've been angry at someone for rebuking me, but I know that I've learned from experiences like that how to, at least with some difficulty, to turn it to something good and to accept the rebuke and just roll with it. Especially if it's true. It's hard. It's hard when you believe the truth about you is false, or you don't want to believe it. That's another thing. Sometimes we don't want to believe things about ourselves that are true. And we want to be blind to it because thinking about it is painful. It's hard when some part of our character is so flawed and you can't do anything about it, or you feel like you can't do anything about it, but then you have to be reminded of it. When it's something you'd like to kind of bury since it's not fixed. But the Lord's going to want to dig all that stuff up. And he's going to want to put it all on display. For you at least. Not to put you to shame, but to rather bring you to him. To bring you not to him as in faith, but to bring you to him as into the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. Because that is where we are going. So they said, they asked him, is this him? Right, they call them. That was pretty easy with the reading. We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind, but by what means he now sees, we know not, or who hath opened his eyes, we know not. He is of age, ask him, he shall speak for himself. Okay, these words spake his parents because they feared the Jews. Yeah, they said, hey, ask him. This implies that they thought he was Christ. They say, we think he's the Messiah, actually, because we know this is our boy. He was born blind, yes. But they don't want to. They're saying, what do you say? We know that he was born, but how he sees, we don't know, or what. That might be true. But it says they feared. They probably had heard. But when you hear a rumor, like I heard it was Jesus. I wasn't there. I heard it was him. So why should they have to answer for things that they don't know for sure? They knew that he was born blind, But how he sees, we don't really know. We heard that because they had heard, I'm sure. They don't know, though. Why don't you ask him? Because that's where we got it from. They're not. That's the quiet part. They're not. The quiet part they're not saying out loud. Because I believe that. I believe everything I just said. That they do indeed know. I mean, because right? Because they feared the Jews. Why were they afraid? What's there to be afraid of? Well, they knew it had something to do with Jesus and the Sabbath and all that. And if anyone confessed him as Christ, that person would be put out of the synagogue, excommunicated basically. They wouldn't be allowed to be part of the community worship. Community, well, of scripture reading. That's a form of worship. So they said, ask him. So they call him again, and they say, give God the praise. Always give God the praise. We know that this man is a sinner. It's interesting. In the book of Revelation, there are many times where there are two occasions, I should say, where John is being shown about by these angels, and he says, I fell at the feet of him that showed me these things, of the angel. I fell at his feet to worship him, this angel. And he said specifically, see thou do it not. I am of thy brethren, the prophets, and of them which keep the testimony of Jesus. Worship God. And on another occasion, something very similar, right? I'm kind of paraphrasing both of them. Very similar. John falls down to worship before the feet of an angel, which is giving him all these divine visions and all this stuff. So that he felt like it was, he fell at his feet to worship him, and twice he was rebuked. Don't do it. But this man falls at the feet of Christ. And I ask you the question, is that, because the angel said, worship God. Worship God only. And when this man falls at the feet of Jesus and worships him, in verse 38, Lord, I believe, and he worship him, Jesus does not rebuke him, but says something rather, I am come for judgment. He doesn't say, see thou do it not. Worship God. Give God the glory. God healed you. No, he readily accepts worship. And if he wasn't God, he would be unrighteous, because the angel refused to be worshipped. To have anyone fall at his feet and worship him, because he was, I am of thy fellow servants and of the prophets. I worship God. It would not be, so if an angel is not worthy to be worshipped, then, and only God, then Jesus, by receiving worship, is either sinning or rightly accepting worship, which is only due God, which is what it is. So there's another example. When Jesus does not rebuke someone, he implies, it is implicit that he is God. There are a lot of things like that in John. John, if you look at the overall picture from 1,000 feet up, John is all about Jesus is God, and get it through your head. That's what the message. That's what John's trying to let you know. In part, that is a huge theme of the Gospel of John. It's undeniable. It's always making the Pharisees mad, and and being very peculiar in that way. Okay, he is of age. Ask him. Give God the praise. We know that this man is a sinner. Now, he could have just said, okay, but he decided to be defensive of Jesus, which is, makes you like the guy. Because he says, well, wait a second. Whether he be a sinner or no, I don't know. One thing I know, that whereas I was blind, now I see. And again, he's saying, hey, I just got the fact that I said he was a prophet. You guys say he's a sinner. I don't know if he's a sinner or not, but I do know that he healed my eyes. And then they asked him again, what did he do? How did he open your eyes? Now, he said it like several times to all different, everyone's heard the story. He says, I told you already. And you didn't hear, apparently, because you're still asking, right? Why do you want to hear it again? will you also be his disciples? Because he probably thinks you should be his disciples. He makes people who are blind to see. To him, it's kind of obvious. Why aren't you hearing this? He made me see. And it emboldens him somewhat against them to say things like this. This is pretty rude. Do you want to be his disciples? Because he knows he's talking to the biggest muckety-mucks in town. He was just the lowest of the low. Because you understand, the Pharisees did adhere to this doctrine. When they saw someone born in sins, they looked at that. Because that comes out in the book of Acts also, when Peter heals the guy who was in the notable, I think it was cripple, right? Or was that also vision? I forgot what he had. But it's irrelevant. But they did a healing, and it was the same argument against that guy that he was born a sinner. And that's why he had that. And so they looked at themselves and say, as a perfectly whole person, I thank God I'm not like this man who was obviously born a sinner, and his parents are sinners because they were cursed with a blind baby. And they'd look at someone born with Down syndrome and say, what a cursed child, what a cursed family. Look at the curse that's come upon them. That was their attitude. And so they see a blind beggar, they pity him, but they also think deep down, he probably deserves it. And it's because there's a truth in that. And then none of us deserves anything. So whatever we do get is flip a coin. We probably deserve it, you know? Flip a coin with two heads, we deserve it. You know what I mean? I mean, we deserve it. As much as we deserve anything else. What is it we deserve? We came from nothing. God formed man of the dust of the earth and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. He didn't deserve that. It's not a question of what you deserve. It's a question of what God wants. And they reviled him and said, thou art his disciple. We are Moses' disciples. We're with Moses, man. Oh, you guys follow Luther. We follow Jesus. We're the church of Jesus. You get that too. People who want to claim, be his disciple. That if you were Moses' disciples, then you'd be obedient to Moses, to what Moses did. We know that God spake to Moses. As for, that you've never seen. They talk about last one. Thou art not yet 50 years old, and hast thou seen Abraham? You guys aren't yet 60 years old or 80 years old or whatever. And have you seen Moses, who was over 1,000 years before your time? 1,000 years before their time, they know that God spoke to Moses. But this guy, who's right in front of my face, healing the blind, I don't know where he's from. I don't know where this guy's coming from. I think he might be a sinner because he's not following Moses' law according to the way we think it should be followed 1,000 years after Moses. We follow Moses' law according to the way we see it 1,000 years after Moses. We know just what Moses was thinking, and we also know that God spake to him. But this guy, I can't tell, man. Moses did all kinds of amazing miracles. I never saw them, but this guy, well, I can't tell where he's from. We can't. What do you mean? No, he's from the devil, isn't he? Because he's a sinner, right? He has a devil, right? That's what he's using, devil powers to heal the blind, and devil powers to make the lame to walk, and devil powers to cast out devils. That's what the kind of lunacy they get into eventually. Because they're so blind. They're blind. They're blinded by their own arrogance of their own beliefs. What they think they know. And the guy says, here's a marvelous thing. You don't know whence he is, and yet he has opened my eyes. And we know that God doesn't hear sinners, right? That's what we believe. God doesn't hear sinners. I mean, at least not to perform some marvel. I'm not going to go, God, perform a marvel. And, you wouldn't expect a guy to be able to, like, if I walk in and heal people you wouldn't think it was because I was a sinner. That's why we need the blood of Christ to cleanse us, so that we could do things that sinners can't do. Sinners don't walk on water. Sinners don't do this and they don't do that. But Jesus does, because he is not a sinner. And God heals. And God does. The wind and the sea obey him. And God hears him. And by implication does what he asks. I will put mud on this guy's eyes and he's going to see. And therefore it happens. And you don't know where he comes from. He does something like give light to the blind, and you don't know if he's of God or not. Now we know that God heareth not sinners, but if any man be a worshipper of God and doeth his will, him he heareth. That's a common thing. In Acts, what they said of, it's very similar to what was said of the centurion Cornelius. It said in every nation, those that fear God, worship God and fear him. And fear is implying doing the will of God. Because by implication, if you fear God, if you genuinely understand the consequences of sin, that genuine fear would cause you to absolutely refuse to do certain things. Whereas our fear is taught by the precept of men, we learn to sort of not fear God, and because fear, it's not fear of like, oh, he's gonna randomly just smite me, like the way a child might fear a bad parent because they're unpredictable and capricious. Same thing. One moment they might be all loving, and the next minute they're smacking them, right? God isn't like that. He isn't some sort of bad parent, but he will smite us for good reason, for our good. But If a man be a worshiper of God and doeth his will, he's going to hear him. And sometimes, here's the thing. Well, and here's the thing. It's like a man whose life is characterized by sin, by yielding to sin, by a sinner. A believer who worships God, who honors God, who keeps himself from sin, may not be perfect, but he does honor God, goes to God, confesses his sins, is mindful, it looks to God to help work out, embedded and ingrained habits that are unproductive and unfulfilling and ungodly. He works that work in us. And he hears us because we have the blood of Jesus on us. That's why he hears us ultimately. Because through the blood of Jesus, that's what enables us to worship God acceptably and to do his will and to know his will. We want to be heard. God, through his mercy, will hear us, even when we're yet in our sins. God doesn't hear sinners, but he will work the miracle of salvation for any sinner. He will hear and give you a miracle like that. And if you lay hold on that, it'll open the door to many more wonders that God will show you. I know, because I've been following God my whole life. I've been pursuing him. Not always with the rigor I should have. But when I was young, I was foolish. I didn't realize, no, pursue God with all your might. It's that important. I mean, if you want the secrets of the universe, you got to find the one who made it all. You got to make contact. People are always like, oh, I want to get a hold of the aliens. Forget the aliens. Talk to God. He already hears us. Since the world began, it was not heard that any man opened the eyes of one that was born blind. And he never heard any stories like that. Men have had sight restored after being temporarily blinded and all that. But someone born without sight? He says, this man was not of God, as you guys said. Now, he confronts it directly. He didn't say if this man was a sinner. No, he says if this man was not of God, he could do nothing. Right? I mean, because if that was the case, men who are not of God would be doing this stuff all the time. The miracles of Jesus were notable. It wasn't like they were used to seeing miracles all the time. That's something people mistakenly think. Like first century literature is like filled with talks of miracles and stuff like that. It's not. It's very peculiar to the gospel. And their answer is, you were altogether born in sins. You were born in sin. You were born blind because God hates you. And you're going to teach us, the masters of the law, and they cast him out. Threw him out. You're going to teach us. Again, they were angry at him because he told them the truth. Let's not, you're going to teach me. I've been teaching the Bible for 25 years. I've had that feeling. Especially when people, they're obviously getting into things, where I'm like, no, this is obviously wrong. But again, it's so easy that when you think you're right to keep thinking it. Be careful. The higher you fly with the Lord, the more you got to be mindful to keep your feet on the ground. Because God is in heaven and you are on earth, Remember, you're not flying as high as you think you are because you're in his chariot. Your feet have to be solidly, I need my feet to be on something. I need my feet on the rock. And when Jesus had heard that he cast him out, it's good. He went and looked for him. Maybe wanted to hear the story. Oh, they threw him out, huh? And he went and looked for him. And so he was like, oh, that's a good sign. Because if they'd there could be other outcomes where he could conspire with them or something to lie or whatever, to accuse Jesus. There are all kinds of corrupt things he could have done to get in good with them. But instead he offended them, which is good. Jesus appreciates the fellow who does right. So Jesus heard that they had cast him out. When he had found him, he said to them, do you believe in the Son of God? He said, who is he, Lord? He doesn't really understand anything. Who is he? He thinks he's a prophet. He doesn't really know. He's not educated. Do you believe on the Son of God? Because he was like, who is this man? They said he was like a prophet, right? And he hadn't used the word Messiah, but he says the Son of God. Because he is the Son of God. God's Son who is God. There is only one, the Son of God. There are sons of God and such. That is referred to in a different sense. In the sense that Christ is the Son of God, there is no other. Because he is the Son of God from everlasting to everlasting, forever and ever. He answered and said, who is he, Lord, that I might believe on him? Who is this Son of God? Sounds important, right? Jesus said to him, thou hast both seen him, and it is he that talketh with thee. He doesn't like to say, that's me all the time, but he puts it this way. He's affirming that I am the Son of God without saying the words, I am the Son of God. That's why people, they want to say, where does Jesus say, I am God? He doesn't even say, I am the Son of God here, but it is implied. I mean, you want to be willfully blind and not see it, then that's perfectly that's willful blindness. And he says, Lord, I believe, and he worshipped him. And like I said before, that's an indication. Jesus assent to this, to allow this to happen. If he allows it to happen and he is not God, then he has sinned. People say, well, there's all kinds of worship. And the kind that's talked about here, where he worships him, that's the kind we're talking about. Do you believe on the Son of God? And he said, Lord, I believe, and he worshipped him. And Jesus said, for judgment I am come into this world, that they which see not might see, and that they which see might be made blind. We talked about this verse, but it's very important. There's both sides of it. Those who think they are, in the highest religious positions, to be brought down. We ought to be careful, because do we not think in our, I think in my little Bible study, my little group, it's like, well, we are really in tune with God. We are really trying to be Christians. We are trying to take our faith seriously and follow after, right? Just like the Pharisees. Don't think that they weren't sincerely trying to do this right. Or many of them were. Or certainly the system was set up out of a sincere desire to do things right. But just like anything, like it's like a club. Pharisees are not all created equal. A lot of times entry has more to do with social status than actual piety. So while they have this outward piety that they all kind of show off because it's part of being in the club, they also inwardly are not necessarily buying into all of it. But then if someone who then openly flaunts something that they all, is part of the sign that you buy into the fiction that we're really serious about religion, because I do tend to think that while I think it was set up out of a serious thing and one could feel they were sincere in it, part of me wants to believe that no, they weren't sincere. And of course, not all are. You look at characters like Nicodemus, and there's a man who sincerely believes. And like the other ones who are mentioned in this chapter, who sincerely questioned whether a sinner could do such things. Nevertheless, they were not put out of the synagogue because they did not declare Jesus. So, and that's what, again, then the Pharisees which were with him heard these words. The ones who were, I take that as with him. They were with him. He's not a sinner. How could a sinner do such things? They're not ready to declare him, but like, okay, well, it seems to be a contradiction to us because you're violating the Sabbath. And what he wants to say is like, I am Lord of the Sabbath. How about that? Do you understand? I'm Lord of the Sabbath. I'm a Lord of Lords. Obey me. Moses said, when I came, you should hear me. And I'm telling you things you don't want to hear, but you got to hear me anyways. He should have told you he'll be saying things that you at the time won't like hearing, and most of you are going to reject him. In fact, he is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And we, as it were, hid our faces from him. Isaiah 53. I know what the Jews interpreted it as, but it's not as good as the one we got. Our interpretation is so much better. It works so much better for Jesus than it does for Jacob as the suffering servant. For judgment I am come into the world. I came not to judge. I'm come for judgment. I came not to judge the world, but I am come, God judges no one, but commits all judgment to me. I judge no man, but I judge things. And the judgment that I bring into the world, because what it is he's just, I am come for judgment. What does that mean? In light of all that other stuff about judgment that's been said, because Paul, you're just confusing us. You're not actually enlightening us. True. All right. I am coming to the judgment for which he is come into the world is that they which see might see not, and they which, whatever, that the blind may see and that the seeing may be blinded. That the last may be first and the first may be last. There's a lot of reversal in the things Jesus says, in a lot of the things, even the firstborn of the poor shall feed and the needy shall lie down in safety, and I will kill thy root with famine, and they shall, whatever. That was Moab. But similar ideas, though, of things that can happen. But judgment, because he didn't come to judge any man. As he said, you judge after the flesh, I judge no man. And yet if I judge, my judgment is true. Certainly not in the context that he said that was he standing in judgment of anyone. Certainly not in the sense of condemnation. But God, though Jesus did not judge people when he came into the world, the purpose of his coming was for judgment. And though he did not judge anyone, his existence on the earth was like a judgment against men. Why? Because the light shined, and men hated it because their works were evil. He came into the world not judging people, but merely being who he was and saying the things that God had given him to say. And for that he was hated, despised, killed, and crucified. And that is the judgment that is on the world. Because when the light came into the world, it despised the light and tried to snuff it out. That's judgment against the world. And so those that believe might be able to see, and those which believe not might be made blind and not understand what's going on, not see the light not see the light of Christ. because God sees them as unworthy. Not that any of us is worthy. But those that think themselves worthy are often the least worthy of all, because they have not prepared their hearts to meet the holy God, to be laid bare before him, to not be received as they are accustomed to, with honor and dignity. Oh, here's the most important person in the world. Open the door for him. Roll out the red carpet. God is no respecter of persons. You're accustomed to being treated like some sort of royalty. Well, God isn't going to give you that treatment. Not because he doesn't see any royalty, doesn't see anything good in you. And while there's not much good in that poor blind beggar, at least when he sees a sign, he can believe in it. Because he's not blinded by his own arrogant posturing and bull. And here are some Pharisees. Again, I take this as the Nicodemus type, the ones that are saying, how can a sinner do such things? And also then saying, are we also blind? Yes. Yes. But because you say you see, if you were truly blind, like that blind man, you should have no sin in your blind. I mean, there's no sin in the fact that that blind guy couldn't see. Just like Jesus. Who sinned that he was born blind? Well, there's no sin in it. It's that the works of God be made manifest. In our blindness, in our sight, if we see, let me put it this way. If that man was born blind, that the works of God should be made manifest, then I was born with sight, that the works of God may be made manifest. And I should use that sight to that end. And if I have sight and say I have sight, then I damn well better be manifesting the works of God and not sin. And if I manifest sin, then that sin remains. I mean, just in the sense of it's there. Now, as far as being a Christian and being, well, for them, of course, there's sin because, well, here's the thing. The reason the sin remains is because they deny the truth and their blindness. And so the sin caused by the blindness, by the inability to see, not being able to believe in Jesus. Because if you keep thinking you're not blind and going on in your same ways, you'll never come to Christ, and you shall die in your sins. But if we admit our blindness and know it and receive the idea that, like, yeah, I don't know anything and I can't see anything in the Spirit. I need God to enlighten me. I don't really know the truth. I can't tell right from wrong. My conscience gives me hints sometimes, sure, when I accuse or excuse other people. But there are some things that I genuinely can't tell on my own. And also, God, I just don't know what I should do with my life. I don't know which direction to go. Where should I go? Jesus always seemed to know where to go. We'll go over the sea. We'll go back to Galilee. We'll go down to Judea. He knew where he was going. Me, I don't know where I'm going. So I need God to guide me because I'm blind. And I have no sin because I don't know. How could I sin? I don't know where I'm going. If I offend, if I miss the mark, how could I sin? I don't know where I'm going. But where I see, there is sin. There is sin where you see. Now the blood of Jesus washes it away. But don't take that for granted. Even though you can take it for granted because it's assured through your faith that you will be saved. But people who take it for granted and don't honor the covenant, don't respect and behave appropriately as to one who has been saved from death, who has been rescued from the fate that they had coming, you can easily find that you did not possess what you thought you did. You find, I wasn't saved at all. I thought I was saved because I said I believed. And I thought I believed because I thought it was true. But I went my way because I didn't care. Because I thought it was true, but not as true as I really want to follow my lusts. Not as true as I really want to. I'm more interested in the latest, TV series or something. Got to watch that. Got to find time for that. Always find time for that, but never find time for the Lord. Why do you think Jesus says, I never knew you? Because they didn't have a relationship with him. He didn't know who they were. I don't know who you were. If you were talking to God, you weren't talking to me. I heard the voice of words, but did not hear the sound that they made. I don't know what they said. Because I hear not the prayers of those that despise me. Yeah, we see. When you see, your sin remains. And that's true. I tell you the truth, where God has opened my eyes, I can't shut them and pretend to be blind. That's another thing. You can't pretend you're blind. You know sin is in you, well, you got to look after it. You know, that's part of sanctification. God will help you, but also he wants you to work, because you are his workmanship, created unto good works in Christ Jesus. The manifestation of those works makes it obvious that your faith is true to everyone who can see them. You know, they know, people know I believe. I could prove it. You know, you can watch the what are we up to? I'll do 1,000 studies, and you'll never, and there's no Patreon to click on. Nope. No, there is not, and nor shall there be. All right, we're going to continue with chapter 10. I know we went over quite a bit today because it got cut off, but I decided I wanted to finish this chapter. So chapter 10 would probably get split up. It's a little more, a little less singular. There's very, very single subject here, right? Anyways, thanks for joining me this day. Look forward to being back again tomorrow. Until then, remember to know the Lord, seek him and find him, and do not be dissuaded or slow. I'm looking for music. Be slowed down. My exit music's all gone. Oh, because my computer fell off, of course. Usually it's ready. All right, I should just sing my way off. Oh, it does not want to go to live streaming. Anyway, making you also suffer through that. Okay. Where is the music, Paul? This should help. There we go. And this is amazing. This is why I have to prepare ahead of time. Usually for this. It's all ready. That's all just to pull up John. I have a big computer.
Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that enters not by the door into the sheepfold, but climbeth up some other way, the same is a thief and a robber. But he that enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the porter openeth, and the sheep hear his voice. And he calleth his own sheep by name, and leadeth them out. And when he putteth forth his own sheep,